And here we are with episode 56.
Yes. How are things?
Oh, pretty good. Where I live in the world, it's been raining quite a lot,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting. We have this, you've probably heard of El Nino before.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with the phenomenon.
Yeah. So I'm not sure where in the cycle we are, but I think we might be in the wet bit because I'd say for the last month it's stopped now, but for about a month probably rained. And then of course before that we actually had a cyclone, also known as a hurricane, which was one of the few that has reached this part of Australia. I think it's been 50 years or so. And it actually, so I think in 50 years, no cyclone has crossed the coastline where I am. Okay.
Mhm.
And it didn't happen this time. There was a cyclone, but it decided not to cross the coastline until after it had stopped being a cyclone. So technically, the record still stands. It's 50 years plus
Yeah.
without a cyclone. So
Mm.
but we did get lots of rain. And anyway, and as I said, and even after the cyclone was gone, we got weeks and weeks of rain. And outback Australia has been flooded. So there was a poem that was written by an Australian woman who was in the UK, and she was quite homesick. Anyway, one of the lines in the poem refers to Australia as a land of droughts and flooding rains, and it really is true. If the country isn't having a drought, it seems like it's having a torrential downpour. So the weather, it's always been that way. But I mean, some people have said that people who are studying the weather actually focus on Australia because they're quite interested in the weather patterns and so forth because it can be useful information for elsewhere in the world. But yes, so we've had quite a lot of rain, which is good. Rain's good, better than droughts. But we did one of the interesting things actually about this is that we have some lakes, so-called lakes in outback Australia, which aren't really lakes at all. They're actually more like salt pans.
Hmm.
But every once in a while, it'll flood and water will fill them for a month or two or something like that, and they'll briefly be a lake. And
Yeah.
about 20 years, I don't know if it's happened recently, but about 20 years ago this happened, and inexplicably a bunch of pelicans turned up and started
Hmm.
living there. And they were just quite happy to live there for a couple of months until the water drained away, and then I guess they just flew away to somewhere else.
Mm.
But I don't know how they knew that the water had filled there, but I don't know if but anyway, it's quite interesting. Yes. So
Yes.
if it's not bone dry in the middle of Australia, it's probably flooded.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Here
I've
in Florida, it's to my delight, it hasn't been much of what you call rain at all. It's been nice and sunny for a while, and I think people get a really strange idea about me because I wear a lot of black or something that I hate sunlight or something like that. But I've been really enjoying it because it gives me an opportunity to go out on my walks and do my jump roping and all that stuff. And uh, I don't know. Rain has a way of ruining plans for me, so I'm just not crazy about it. But
yeah.
all things considered, I've been pretty happy with how the weather's turned out. Obviously, all good things will come to an end eventually. But so I'm just taking advantage of it as much as I can right now.
Are you far enough inland that you're mostly not as impacted by the hurricanes when they come by?
That's kind of the case. I'm the center of Central Florida, so forth. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty fortunate that I don't live in, like, say, Tampa, where the sea is practically right there. So yeah, we don't get as impacted by hurricanes as much as those outer rims. So
Yeah. I guess that's a good thing about Orlando then, because they put a lot of the Disney's there, a lot of the other attractions are there. I guess they're probably less likely to be impacted by weather events. So
yeah, to be sure.
yeah, I've been fortunate enough, as you know, to spend a little bit of time in Florida. So
Yeah.
I've got just a couple of items actually, and I
All right.
believe you have a few items.
Yeah.
Yep. So, first of all, I just wanted to mention, so Rachel Zegler is continuing to be in the media. I think since not long after the last episode, actually, there were a few new developments. Uh,
Okay.
I think it was just after the last episode that they started to talk about possibly demanding some money back from her, which is interesting. I mean, there would have to be some sort of contractual breach.
Mm.
Then I suppose they would have to sue to try to get the money back.
Yeah, that's quite an unusual situation. I think I wonder if it's. I really wonder if it's some sort of contractual thing, or is it some sort of pointing the fingers as to who's to blame for the lack of success of Snow White or something. If this even has to do with
Yeah,
Snow White at all. So
yeah. Well, no, I think it does, but I
yeah,
wonder if I don't think they get much back from her if they didn't sort of pull out the lawyers. But
yeah.
yeah, it'll be interesting. It could have a dampening effect on other actors working with Disney. But it's more broadly, I would hope that Disney is starting to take a good hard look at why they're having so many problems and why they're having so many failures. Woke is a problem. It's not the only problem they have, I think, but obviously
Clearly
it is a
not.
really big. Yeah, they've got yes, have quite another number of other problems. Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, it'd be interesting to see what happens there. Apparently, there's also been a little bit of criticism of Gal Gadot as well, or Gal Gadot. Actually, I don't know which way she pronounced it. I've heard both, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Gal
I'll say
Gadot, I
Gal.
guess.
I think
I
I'll
don't know.
say Gal Gadot.
Yeah, I'm not the authority on that one. So
No, no, I should have checked, but I haven't. So yeah, I think it's Gal Gadot. Anyway, because they've obviously both got strong opinions on the Middle East, with Gal herself being Israeli and obviously, likely to put her in a more of a pro-Israel position, and Rachel Zegler being quite anti-Israel. I think it'd be probably fair to say. And apparently, they didn't get on the set at all as a result of this. But yeah, apparently there were some criticisms of her as well, that claiming that it wasn't just Rachel Zegler who brought politics into it. But although I would dare
uh,
say it was mostly Rachel Zegler who brought the
sure.
politics into it. That's
Mhm.
my personal feeling about it.
Mhm.
Anyway, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think we've seen the last chapter of this. I wouldn't have thought that Zegler herself would have got that much money, that they could claw that much back from her, compared to the enormous quantities, 300 odd million that they US that they spent.
Mhm.
But yeah, we'll see what happens. Next one I wanted to mention is just a great man of history.
All right.
So as you know, every episode I'll be bringing up a great man of history, and I'm doing this because there's been some movement towards sort of suppressing the involvement and the importance of some of the great men of history. In the last few years, we've even seen people trying to claim that Albert Einstein's first wife was really the brains of the operation. Now, it is true that she. Yeah, it is true that she was a physicist, and a lot of them actually a lot of the time that's actually true. I mean, as I said last time, Marie Curie's husband Pierre was a
Right.
uh, was a physicist, obviously, and a senior to her. But yeah, so Einstein's first wife was a physicist, and I believe she did, contribute to some of his early work. But I don't think there's any real basis for claiming that the advancements he made and the insights he had were anything other than his own work.
Mm.
Yes. Anyway, I do mention though that because there has been a push to suppress the involvement. As I said last time with Marie, a lot of people know Marie Curie. They're really surprised to discover her husband was a physicist and a
Yeah.
well-renowned physicist before she even turned up, and of course Henri Becquerel, who I mentioned as well. So
Exactly.
this time though, yeah. So this time it's actually a little bit different. The gentleman I'm talking about is Howard Florey. Interestingly, in this case, and I'm not necessarily suggesting this was intentional at all, but his discovery is actually attributed largely to another man.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, and I don't think it was anything intentional on the part of the other gentleman. It's just how things happened in terms of the name that got out there and was put out publicly. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about antibiotics. So
Okay.
Alexander Fleming famously discovered penicillin.
Yes.
The story goes that he wasn't very good at cleaning his lab, and he'd left some petri dishes, and mold grew on them, and he realized that there were antibacterial properties of the mold, and that is of course a great insight, and that introduced penicillin to the world, and it meant that people could then go ahead and develop it to save lives. But the actual development of it, a lot of people think that Fleming just went ahead and developed that, and now we have penicillin. In actual fact, it was done by a team of researchers led by an Australian by the name of Alexander Fleming.
Hmm.
So then I just by Howard Florey, I should say.
All right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and he actually this was pretty common actually, particularly among Australians at the time. He undertook postgraduate studies in the UK and the US, and anyway, he led the team that extracted and purified penicillin from the mold.
Hmm.
And then they went on to conduct trials in which they established that penicillin was not toxic in useful doses to humans. And they found that, yeah, penicillin was useful against a wide variety of bacteria. So really, it's Florey and his team who are really doing a lot of the hard work here. And they're the ones who, yep, sure, they knew that mold had these properties, but they're the ones extracting it, purifying it, making it useful. They were injecting it into mice and studying the results and so forth, and then they were able to move on to human subjects and so forth.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but more than that, as Florey actually recognised that penicillin was world changing. Interestingly enough, though, there appears not to have been a lot of interest initially in it, and by this point we're talking 1939 or so, the beginning of World War II. And really, there's still, so 10 years after Fleming was doing his work, and there still wasn't a lot of interest in it. So I really think I feel we can credit Fleming not just with an impressive scientific discovery, but also with realizing that he needed to raise awareness about it, because he was quite successful in eventually raising awareness of the potential life-saving properties and so forth.
Hmm.
Now, Fleming's first wife, Ethel, worked with him for a while early in his career. So, any guess when they start claiming that Ethel was actually the brains behind the operation and was responsible for penicillin? I'm sure
Right.
that'll come at some stage. So there you go. That's my prediction. I think
Hmm.
they'll claim that Florey's wife Ethel was really doing it, but no, she was involved early on. Not, I don't think it was so much with the penicillin work actually. I think it was with other work he was doing. But anyway, she dropped out later on when she got pregnant, as is commonly the case. So
Right.
I actually talk about this in the Victorian fallacy, the book that I'm still writing about. I'll get to that actually
Sure.
about the tendency of how we're actually returning to a trend that I think is historical. Now, I'll get to that. So anyway, uh, yeah, so I just finally want to say one last thing on antibiotics, and I think this is important. And I kind of probably kind of knew this, but I read this while I was researching about Florey, and I think it's actually really important. So there have been no new classes of antibiotics discovered since 1986. And I think that's important. I think we should bear this in mind. The period from the 1960s to the 1980s was really a period of a lot of innovation in many different fields, including medicine. And still are huge,
Yeah.
significant advances in medicine and so forth. But here's an advancement in pharmacology. The important antibiotics are extremely important, and yet we're really still riding on, 40 years later, we're still riding on inventions that were actually developed 40 to 60 years ago. So, or 40 to 80 years ago. So I really think the importance of that can't be understated. I think maybe society needs to be more aware of the fact that we haven't developed any new classes of antibiotics, and there's a real risk that if we get more and more antibiotic resistant bacterium, for example,
Yeah.
that we might have problems with continuing to use the antibiotics.
Mhm.
But I just wanted to get back to about in reference to Florey's wife, Ethel. So she was a scientist, and she got pregnant and then sort of dropped out and looked after the kids. And this is a pattern that I think is actually the historical norm. And I didn't actually realize this until I started researching for the Victorian fallacy. And time after time after time, I found situations in which see, a lot of people don't know. The idea is starting to get more common now, but historically women worked. The idea that women didn't
Sure.
work until recently is just ridiculous. Society
Exactly.
wasn't wealthy enough to have people not working, doing a bit of light housekeeping or whatever. No, no, no. People were
Yeah.
toiling in the fields, men, women, children. And one example I've often given is that in Europe, for example, there were women in the trades in the Middle Ages. That's a lot of people don't know that. There were swordsmiths and armorers, all sorts of things. Uh, and it was actually quite common for a man and a woman to meet in the guild when they were doing their training, marry, and start a small business together. So it all sounds very modern, but we're talking about 14th, 15th, 16th century. This sort of thing was going on,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Kind
And
of
but the,
one's own in group kind of a thing, right?
What was that, sorry?
Like meeting in one's own immediate in-group or community, and instead of
Well,
some
yeah, well,
strange, yeah, yeah,
yeah. So I
inside
mean,
your own guild.
yeah, I mean, and a husband and wife starting a business together, which is something that you
Yeah.
would see today, and people
Hmm.
often don't think of it as something that would have been happening hundreds of years ago, but it did.
Yeah.
But there was a definite pattern that emerged, and you see it in a lot of other places too, that the man would work full time, okay, and the wife would initially work full time in the business as well, and sooner or later, a year, 3, 5, whatever, she'd fall pregnant. At that point, she would reduce her involvement in the business and look after the kids, especially when they're young, and maybe when they're a bit older, return to the business. Because remember, in this case, we're talking both the man and the woman have qualified in the trade.
Yeah.
And you would see this pattern where the man would work full time and the woman would work part time and split her efforts between the business and looking after the small children. And that seeing that historically really struck me as something that people see as rather a modern pattern, but I think it's actually quite old. So my contention is that this pattern started to would disappear in the West in the early years of the 20th century, up to about maybe really up World War II. A lot more women were working full time. Professional childcare became more and more common, and so forth. But we're seeing women, I think, go back to it. And I actually think what my hypothesis is that we're actually returning to the historical norm, which is of the man working full time in a marriage and the woman working part time and splitting her time between working and looking after children. And I think if you look back in the historical record, you see this, and I think we're seeing a trend back towards it. And to me, I take no judgment on it at all. If that's what if that's what works for a couple, fine for them.
Yeah.
Don't care what other people do in that sense. But I do think it is something that is an historical norm, and that people are probably finding is a very comfortable thing to do in the modern world.
Mhm.
There are distortions in the market. France is an interesting example where in France, of course, they have heavily subsidised childcare.
Mhm.
Where I think you can get childcare for one euro a day or something along those lines. It might be a little bit more now with inflation and whatnot, but it was at one point recently it was 1 euro a day, which that distorts the market and incentivizes women to return to the workplace. But I think in the absence of those sort of policies, I think this is a pattern that we will increasingly see. Anyway, I wanted to mention that. I don't know if I've mentioned that before, actually. I've written it about in the book. This may be the first time I've actually mentioned it publicly. I don't recall. So
Yeah.
anyway, it just reminded me when I was looking at Howard Florey and his work that pattern was turning up again.
Exactly.
So yeah, so that's all I have on Howard Florey, another great scientist historically who is largely forgotten today, unfortunately, overshadowed in this case by Alexander Fleming. Uh, but anyway, just wanted to talk about him.
Okay. Yeah, that's absolutely interesting. Yeah. It's really, kind of going back to this idea that feminism caused women to work, or that conservatives said that uh, women are happy not working. Both sides are kind of are really wrong here. It's women really did pursue trades and also scientific studies alongside men, to be sure.
Absolutely, that's right, exactly. I mean, that's Florey's wife is, as we were saying, a scientist. This was in the early 20th century. I think she was doing her work in the 1920s alongside him. So, yes, this was very common. And obviously, we have women going to university, we have women going and studying. And obviously, the proportion of the population who went to university, 100, 200 years ago was really very small. But you certainly had women studying engaging in advanced study. And you also had, and this is another thing that feminism has tended to do, and portray this idea that women weren't educated historically, which is just a
Right.
bizarre claim. Both men and women were in any given society were educated to the extent that their society needed them to be educated so they could function and maintain the society. And that, to a large degree, meant that men and women would get some, say, different education, but there would also be core areas that they would both learn. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Because one thing that pops into mind in terms of like female and male scientific partnerships, like uh, one example that always pops into my mind is William
William
Herschel and his
Herschel,
sister
sister
Caroline Herschel.
Caroline. Go
I
on.
think the big thing that Herschel himself discovered was infrared radiation, but he had also discovered other bodies like moons of Saturn and Uranus and so forth.
Yes.
Um, but but his sister was a frequent collaborator with him and
Mm,
was a was not, was not stupid or anything like that. She wasn't like
exactly.
kept in the house or anything. So
And
yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Her family would have actually encouraged her to participate,
Mhm.
exactly as was so often the case, actually. And in fact, I think with the Herschels, their family was quite well to do, I believe. And of course, that was a big determiner. It was really, particularly at the time, it was wealthy people who had the time, wealthy people, men and women, who had the time to pursue these sorts of areas of study
Right.
because they didn't have to labor under some exhausting job all day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yes, this is
Um,
a common pattern.
right. Yeah. Absolutely. Right.
Herschel, of course, was also the person who named asteroids too, I believe.
Yes. Hmm.
Yes.
Yes. I think that's correct.
Mm. Because I
And
think he discovered Ceres, didn't he? I
I
believe
think
so.
he might as well. So I know he discovered Mimas or Mimas. I think Enceladus and Titania and Oberon and some others. Yeah. So
Because when the asteroids were first discovered, they weren't called asteroids because nobody had made
mhm,
up that name yet, and
mhm.
they were called planets.
Yeah.
And yes, and they kept discovering a whole bunch of these things, and the number of planets suddenly started ticking up really, really quickly.
Hmm. Right.
And they ended up realizing they gave them Herschel
Yeah.
gave them a new classification,
Sure.
asteroid,
Yeah.
and
Right.
they were removed from the set of planets. Very
Hmm. Yeah.
similar to what
Sure.
was yeah, very similar to what was to happen to Pluto a century or so later.
Right. Well,
Hmm.
I think he discovered Uranus itself too.
2 centuries. Did he? I don't recall. He may well have done.
Right. Well,
Yes, yes,
so
I think you're
yeah.
right. Actually, yes.
Yeah, sure. So well, one thing I'm looking up now is that upon the early part of discovery, um, they were going to call the planet Herschel, but um, but they went
And there
on
was another
Uranus
name,
instead, and
and there
we
was
don't have any more. And then if they named it Herschel, then I don't think there would be as much jokes at the expense of the planet's name anymore.
exactly. He would have deprived everyone of that joke. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Like one of my favorite articles ever. I do have an interest in astronomy. One of my favorite articles
Hmm.
ever talked about Uranus releasing gas, and it was
Hmm.
they
Yeah.
actually did that in an article title. It was just priceless.
Hmm.
Um, but I believe at one point too, they were considering naming it after George V as well.
Really? Yeah.
Yes,
I yeah. I think um yeah. Was it George the Fifth?
I think so. I think from memory.
All right, yeah.
Um, yes,
Um
I could.
yeah, right. And another joke I have is Uranus probes.
That's great, isn't it? I
Right, yeah.
mean, I'm so glad they did that. So it's given us centuries of humor.
Hmm. Right, yeah. But anyway, I think that's all I had. But if it's okay with you, Rob, while we're on the subject of planets, next time I want to talk about the discovery of Neptune.
Oh yeah,
Right, yeah, because that involved two men independently coming up with the discovery of Neptune, and there's a bit of a story behind it. So, but I want to
exactly.
save that. So,
So for next time, yes,
yeah,
I know a
yeah,
little
sure.
bit about the discovery of Neptune. So yes, it
Yeah.
is a good one.
Hmm.
So for those who don't know, too, if I am remembering correctly, Uranus is the last of the planets that you can see with the naked eye. So it was the last of the planets that was known to ancient humans, and
Yeah,
Neptune was not known to ancient humans.
yeah. I believe that is true. Neptune is a relatively recent phenomenon,
Exactly.
discovery. So,
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So the name is just, I guess the name is just in keeping with the theme then. So,
right.
so that was all the items I had. Did you have any other items for for this
Okay.
episode?
All right, so moving away from great men from history, we'll talk about some great musicians of recent history.
That's good.
So I got a double album review, the new Dream Theater album Parasomnia, and the new IQ album Dominion. So I think I'll start with Dream Theater because they're more near and dear to my heart because I've loved them since I was a teenager. It's the first album for some time uh, since the return of original drummer Mike Portnoy, who left the band because he wanted to take a break or something, and he wanted to take the band. He want to have the band take a break or something, but the rest of the band didn't want to go for it, so he went and kind of departed for a time, and Mike Mangini filled in. And I like Mike Mangini too, but it's really good to hear Mike Portnoy behind the kit again. And it really feels like classic Dream Theater in many areas. They kind of got their groove back, I think. Nothing against the Mike Mangini albums because I really do like them, but it really feels like new Dream Theater. It's so the album, as in classic Dream Theater. So the album has to do with well, like the title says, parasomnias, and so things like Night Terrors, Night Terror being a song title of one of the song titles, and things like PTSD sneaking in and interfering with sleep, and and also things like sleep paralysis. And there was one song called "Dead Asleep" that let me really quick uh, look something up. That was based on a real incident in which when a husband sleepwalked and killed his wife and without knowing it. So I think it was a British incident. I'm trying to take a quick look at it now, but I'm not
Yeah,
seeing
people have done
anything.
all sorts of things while
Mhm.
asleep.
Right.
Driven
Yeah.
cars. Yeah.
Yeah. Here it is. A 2009 incident where a Welshman named Brian Thomas murdered his wife while sleepwalking. Um, but yeah, I'm on both of these albums. I'm on my fifth run through of it, and I'm liking it more and more. I love the return of the use of recurring themes, which was always one of my favorite things about Dream Theater's music across their albums. Like you hear leitmotifs here or there, tastefully done. I'm very satisfied with this album. Um,
Good.
yep. Now, IQ
What would you,
go ahead, go ahead.
honestly, what would you call the genre?
Well, so they fall under progressive metal, which is a
Mhm.
blend between progressive rock and metal. Though I, I'm not fond of the word progressive applied to today's music, and it's not for the reason you think.
Right.
Um, back in the 70s, progressive rock or prog rock, I think, was more rightly called because it really was trying to innovate and so
Right.
forth. And Dream
Yep.
Theater had been innovators too because they were one of the early groups fusing progressive rock sensibilities, metal, and also virtuosity, which and kind of really kind of started a whole I hate to say it, but trend on in that sort of style. And they still have great ideas still, even in this album, but I don't like it when other bands kind of call themselves progressive metal anymore. I because we're paying tribute to your influences at this point, like
Hmm.
so we're it's it's I wish there was a better term for it. Somebody suggested like jazz metal, but that's too specific. But so I'm not unless they are doing something a little bit more innovative. Um, I'm not always fond of that title, but for lack of a better one, and with some reluctance, that's the title I'm going to go with. So, uh, if you're into metal, think well. I almost would say Iron Maiden, but Iron Maiden are so specific in their sound, it's kind of hard to rip them off and get away with it. So it's It's really hard to describe. Some hints of Metallica here or there, maybe on the lighter side, maybe Yes, or maybe a little bit of Pink Floyd or some. So it's I'm really scatterbrained about trying to pinpoint what one genre this is because that's kind of the nature of the thing. It's like a whole spectrum of sounds and emotions and moods and styles. So yeah.
I'm not
Do
much
you
of an
have any
expert on
other?
music.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say was that while I'm not generally into metal, I had recently found a musician who's taking non-metal songs and doing them as metal, and some of those are actually quite good. I don't
yeah, yeah,
recall the
yeah.
gentleman's name at the moment, but some of those have been quite fun.
Yeah, many
Mm.
groups do that on occasion.
Right.
Yeah, but going so with IQ, they're less metal, but they're pretty hard when they need to be, especially in the more recent stuff. So IQ are an older band than Dream Theater. They started in the early '80s, and and they kind of start off with a style of music that they hate the title, and I hate the title even more than progressive metal. Is called neo-prog, which is very meaningless. I think it's a reference to the fact that they were trying to do like a revival the styles of Genesis and Yes and so forth in the '80s, but they wanted to be their own thing, so they hated that title, which in my opinion they've done very well. And this is a really good one. Now,
Mm.
Dominion is a reference to that poem, "And death shall have no dominion." So, and the general feeling of the album is that it's about seizing the day. It's a really uplifting album after about an album or two of more uh, uh, of a drearier atmosphere, I think, because the last album, Resistance, was really kind of on the low end mood wise. But and personally, that album, Resistance, took a lot more time for it to sink in because it was twice as long as their usual albums, and it was riding on the coattail of the album previous to that, The Road to Bones, which I really loved. I just thought it was kind of like a more raw but less fresh take on it. But I grew to love that album. But Dominion, I've loved from the start. It has a really strong start in the opening song, "The Unknown Door." It's they still know how to do it. They still know how to write really
Mm.
melodic songs, and some of the uplifting stuff is reminiscent of their older material. So, uh, Dream Theater's Parasomnia and Dominion by IQ, highly recommend them. Check them out. Is That's what I have to say on that one.
Nice. Did you have any other items you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that is quite it for me.
Otherwise, I've got Zoe McClellan to
All
finish
right,
with.
let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. We're in April now, aren't we? Gosh, yes.
Yes.
As of April 2025, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan is a public figure who has appeared in numerous popular television shows, including Star Trek Voyager, JAG, NCIS New Orleans, and Designated Survivor. Her face is familiar to millions. It is extraordinary that she has evaded detection for so long. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the area alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Thank you. We won't forget. And
All
that's
right.
all I've got for
Okay.
today.
All right. I'll catch you next time.
Catch you next time. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.